When we make mistakes in our everyday life, they often don't take much to fix.
Oh my god, what an idiot.
Correction pens fix spelling errors, and a simple apology is sometimes enough. But what about the most expensive mistakes in history? Sometimes it takes a bucket load of money. From a skyscraper that can fry an egg to an obese train that's no good to anyone, here are the most expensive mistakes in history.
The Baltic Ace. Catastrophic mistakes can happen anywhere, as proven by the Baltic Ace carrier ship, which sank in just 15 minutes in the North Sea on December 5, 2012. The 23,500-ton ship was lost 65 kilometers off the Dutch coast after colliding with Cyprian container ship the Corvus J, killing 11 of its 24 crew members and sinking over 1,400 new Mitsubishi cars which were being transported from Japan and Tokyo to Russia. The wreck ended up almost 100 feet deep in one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, hindering a safe passage for marine traffic and risking the release of dangerous substances into the environment. In March 2014, the company Reichswaterstaat commissioned partners Boskalis and Memot Salvage to remove the wreckage, which began by extracting its 540,000 remaining liters of oil. More than 18 ships and 150 people then took part in a huge operation to remove the sunken vessel, which could only be achieved by lifting the irreparably damaged wreck in chunks. Starting in April 2015, the ship was cut into 8 sections with wire and brought to the surface in pieces. Look at just how huge it was. Here's the bow, with all the cars inside ruined. Dutch police were unable to investigate the accident itself as it occurred outside of their territorial waters, but the mistake has since been speculated as a result of pure human error, as neither ship followed collision regulations. The mammoth salvage operation alone cost 67 million euros, the equivalent of around $75 million today. Add that to the cost of the Baltic Ace and the cost to repair the Corvus J, as well as the cargo they were carrying, and the driving error cost around 150 million in total. Songsu Bridge collapse. The Songsu Bridge over the Han River links 2 South Korean districts and is one of Seoul's most popular commuter routes. But the 3,805-foot structure was struck by disaster on the morning of October 21, 1994. The bridge struggled under the weight of the hundreds of people on their way to work in the early morning rush, and at around 7:40 a.m., a 157-foot central chunk collapsed 65 feet into the river below, along with cars, minibuses, and a fully loaded bus. 32 people lost their lives, while 17 more were injured. An investigation was launched into the freak accident. The bridge had already received complaints about unstable foundations, which caused an unsteady swinging sensation, and the root cause was identified as a construction failure. Reports noted that the steel trestle joints supporting the central suspension had been welded with an incorrect thickness of 8 mm rather than 10 mm, causing crucial connecting pins to break under the immense pressure. Although the bridge was designed to withstand a maximum 36.3-ton weight per car, vehicles weighing 47.3 tons were also using the bridge to commute. These combined factors cost the State Council $185,000 in compensation to the victims, while a complete rebuild set them back the equivalent of an extra $2 million, making this one costly human error.
Botched bridge. The Millennium Bridge between the City of London and Bankside in South London was called a pure expression of engineering structure when it was opened to the public in 2000. It cost around $22 million to build, but the 1,049-foot bridge closed nearly as quickly as it opened when it began to sway dangerously. On its opening day, thousands of pedestrians started to cross it, only to find that it wobbled violently. That inevitably caused the engineers to start looking up ways to change their identity and leave the country. At first, it was assumed that the modern design was a failure and that it hadn't been able to factor in the leg movements of pedestrians. As was later found, though, it was the tiny forces that each person makes while trying to keep their balance that was to blame. The bridge didn't know what to do with that extra bit of pressure. 2 years later, and after fitting 91 dampers to absorb all that movement, the bridge was reopened. It ended up being a $6 million mistake, all because engineers didn't know how people walked on bridges. Stockbroker typo. In most cases, when the average person makes a typo, it's not a big deal. Someone will point it out, you correct it, and everyone moves on with their life. If you're a stockbroker, though, a typo can end up costing tens of millions of dollars. And that actually happened. In 2005, a worker at the Tokyo Stock Exchange, which is one of Japan's largest brokerage firms, caused a company called Mizuho Securities Company to lose about $225 million on a stock trade. That small typo caused a 1.95% drop in the benchmark Nikkei 225 index, not to mention a colossal confidence drop in the Japanese market. It all began when the company tried to sell 610,000 shares at 1 yen, which is less than a penny apiece, in J-Jamco, a job recruiting company. What it meant to do was sell one share for 610,000 yen, or about $5,000. Even though the number of shares was over 40 times the outstanding amount, the Tokyo Stock Exchange processed the order anyway. The security company did try to cancel their order, but the exchange does not cancel transactions, even when they are in error. By the end of business on that day, Mizuho Securities had lost 27 billion yen, or about $250 million.
Deadly skyscrapers. In spring 2014, London welcomed an ambitious new skyscraper to its financial district. The 525-foot-tall reflective building became known as the Walkie-Talkie due to its distinct curved design. But this shiny new tower was hiding a sinister secret. As summer came around, citizens of London began complaining that the building's south-facing concave surface was causing powerful rays of sunlight at certain points in the day, which could raise the temperature to an unheard of 70 degrees Celsius. The highly concentrated beam was capable of melting tiles, causing a small fire on the doormat of a barbershop and melting a Jaguar XJ belonging to a local businessman. While one journalist even attempted to fry an egg in the extreme heat. The newly nicknamed Walkie Scorchy had to be stopped, so a permanent sunshade known as a brise soleil was attached to the building between the 3rd and 34th floors over the course of 6 months, costing over $12 million. A hard pill to swallow considering the building already cost over $250 million to build. Ironically, the architect Raphael Vignoli also designed the Vdara Hotel in Las Vegas, which suffered a similar problem as it singed sunbathers, earning it the nickname the Death Ray. Vignoli confessed that he knew this would happen, but that he didn't have the tools to analyze just how bad it would be. Someone needs to tell this guy to stop designing superweapons instead of buildings.
Having one or two small oopsies in life is not a big deal, but having one large one really is, as the crew of the Rena container ship found out. The 774-foot boat ran aground on the Astrolabe Reef near Bay of Plenty, New Zealand in 2011. With hundreds of tons of hazardous materials, oil, and diesel on board, and a lot of it ending up in the ocean, it was one of New Zealand's worst ever maritime environmental disasters. Was it a storm that caused this shipping container disaster that cost millions to correct? Or was it a navigational error? Piper Alpha. Some mistakes can be costly to fix in monetary terms, but then there are those that are expensive in both lives lost and financial losses. The Piper Alpha oil production platform in the North Sea is an example of that. The platform was operated by Occidental Petroleum Caledonia Limited and started producing oil in 1986. In 1988, it was the scene of the most lethal offshore disaster. An explosion, a gas fire, and an oil fire cost the lives of 167 people, including rescue vessel crewmen. While 61 workers did manage to escape, the bodies of around 30 people were never found. What's more, the entire debacle cost $3.4 billion and the loss of 10% of the oil and gas production line. So why did this disaster happen? 4 modules of the oil field were separated by firewalls to keep everyone safe and were positioned to keep the most dangerous operations away from the personnel areas. When the company started converting from oil to gas processing, the safety concept was no longer valid, and gas compression ended up occurring directly next to the control room. Now that is why we have health and safety procedures, ladies and gentlemen. France's fat trains. When you buy a new vehicle that's a little larger than the one you currently have, you always think of how it's gonna fit in your garage. Which makes sense, because otherwise, you've just wasted a lot of money. Maybe the French-owned railway company, SNCF, should have asked the general public before they blew $15 billion on TGV high-speed trains in 2014 that ended up being too wide for the train stations they were supposed to service. The company discovered far too late that the trains were too broad and would then need to spend at least $55 million to upgrade the train stations to make sure that they fit. That would be like buying your new car, then having to knock down your garage and start from scratch. Well done, guys. The head of the rail network was quick to lessen the blow by saying it was normal to have to upgrade stations to welcome new generations of trains. Perhaps, though, they should have thought of that before investing in so many trains at once. The cost of the station upgrades equated to around 1% of the network's budget for repairs and maintenance.
Lotus Riverside disaster. The Lotus Riverside complex in Shanghai was an ambitious project which ended in complete disaster because of one simple mistake. The residential complex was comprised of 11 new high-rise apartment blocks, but at around 5 a.m. on the 27th of June 2009, one of the 13-story buildings suddenly collapsed, miraculously missing the surrounding blocks and avoiding a devastating domino effect. The incident killed one construction worker, but the fallout could have been much worse if the almost complete building had been occupied by its buyers. Investigations found that the freak accident was caused by non-compliance with construction standards and some seriously shoddy foundations. Earth beneath the building was excavated to make a 15-foot underground car park, and the soil had been piled up 32 feet on a nearby riverbank, which then burst under the pressure, sending water gushing beneath. These muddy foundations caused the building to topple over in a southerly direction, but simply moving the earth elsewhere could have prevented the whole ordeal. This massive oversight caused a number of project investors to withdraw and request their money back, and the company suffered total economic losses of up to $30 million, including construction costs and compensation to the would-be homeowners of the $2,100 per square meter apartments.
Yahoo sells to Alibaba. When it comes to money, very few of us get it right all the time. After all, we can't predict the future. At the time you sell your classic car, it might only be worth a few $1,000s. How are you to know that in a decade, it could be worth 10 times that? The same thing happens in real estate too. You buy in a slump and sell during a high, or you buy in a time of record high pricing and sell out of necessity in a slump. Yahoo was in a similar situation when they sold to Alibaba. In 2005, Yahoo owned 30% of the Chinese multinational company called Alibaba. In 2013, they sold half of their stake to Alibaba for $13 a share, which seemed like a phenomenal deal because they ended up making $7.6 billion out of it. However, by 2014, Alibaba broke records and announced that its stock had risen to $68 a share. Today, they're worth $150, and Yahoo was only able to sell its internet business to Verizon for $4.8 billion in 2017. You win some, you lose some. Blockbuster's lost opportunity. When you see the cemetery of Blockbuster stores around the world, you can't help but shed a wee tear for the lost era. While online movies have created a lot of conveniences, nothing quite beats the excitement of rushing to the video store for the latest release and a bag of popcorn to take home. Blockbuster could still be the thriving chain it once was, but they made a crucial mistake. They turned down the chance to buy Netflix. In the early 2000s, Netflix co-founder and CEO Reed Hastings had been trying to get Blockbuster chief John Antioco to agree to a deal to buy Netflix for $50 million. At the time, Netflix was a DVD by mail rental service. While there was no denying that Reed Hastings was a respected manager, he lacked the foresight to see where the video industry was going. At the time, Netflix was losing money, so they actually gave Blockbuster several opportunities to buy the company. To many people, $50 million might seem like a lot of money, but guess how much Netflix is worth today? It has a market cap of $19.7 billion, and Blockbuster no longer exists. B-2 bomber crash. It might be crazy to think that a little bit of moisture can come with a $1.4 billion price tag, but that was the reality for the United States Air Force when their B-2 Spirit of Kansas stealth bomber plummeted to the ground in 2008. The Spirit of Kansas formed part of the 393rd Bomb Squadron and 409th Bomb Wing of the Whiteman Air Force Base. It was at the end of a 4-month-long deployment along with 3 other bombers and was taking off from Anderson Air Force Base. Nothing seemed very untoward, and the entire launch was being filmed. There was no intention for it to become a blooper video or anything other than a standard base exit, but things went south very quickly. At low altitude, both crew members of the B-2 Spirit of Kansas ejected safely, and the aircraft plummeted to the ground, tumbled, then burst into flames. Officials watched as $1.4 billion went up in smoke. So what went wrong? Well, the weather did. Thanks, Mother Nature, you're a real champion. Heavy rain caused moisture to enter the skin flush air data sensors, which then gave wrong input data to the flight control computers. That resulted in a slow liftoff speed and a stall and descent that was entirely unrecoverable. Fortunately, no one was killed. The unsinkable Titanic sinks. Okay, if you didn't already know, the Titanic was an incredible film, but it was also based on a real event, so let's get that out of the way. And while the movie made squillions of dollars, the real Titanic lost around $7.5 million and over 1,500 lives. The Titanic was called the Unsinkable, but we now know that was a slight exaggeration, because, well, it did sink. The crew were warned of the possible dangers of icebergs, but wanted to test the boat out anyway. It ended up scraping alongside an iceberg, piercing the hull, and causing the ship to take on considerable amounts of water in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Not only did they make a mistake in not avoiding the iceberg, but they also didn't have enough lifeboats for everyone on board. What's more, there were no binoculars in the crow's nest that night, which meant that the crew on the lookout would not have been able to see the iceberg until the last minute. There were so many failings that led to the sinking of the Titanic that there's a documentary called 10 Mistakes That Sunk the Titanic. Costly proofreading error. You wouldn't want to be in charge of bookwork and applications in New Jersey right now if you were to blame for the error that cost over $400 million in federal funding in 2019. New Jersey failed to receive Race to the Top funding in a federal education reform after it accidentally miscalculated budget information for school years. Instead of submitting 2008 to 2009 data, New Jersey submitted data for the current year to 2011, which meant they lost 4.8 points and received 437.8 out of 500, finishing 11th in the competition. While coming 11th might not seem like a big deal, it is when you realize what's at stake. Number 10 on the list, Ohio, received $400 million in grant program funding, while New Jersey, in 11th, received nothing. No one was quick to announce who was responsible for the error, but we assume they've put on a fake mustache, changed their name, and fled the country by now. Everyone else was quick to pass judgment and wonder how they could have made such a mistake. Assembly Speaker Sheila Oliver even went so far as to say that it was astonishing that the administration failed to proofread their own homework when the money could have improved the educational system to prevent such errors. We know, some of these were really hard to hear. Imagine losing millions of dollars from a few written errors. What's the biggest thing or amount of money you've lost through a mistake? Also, check out our other cool stuff showing up on screen right now. See you next time!